Good morning. Welcome to the Celtic Way daily briefing on Tuesday. Yes, Tuesday, June the 14th. Nearly get mixed up there. And I'm delighted, absolutely delighted and honoured and privileged to be joined today by Alan Morrison, who is making his debut on the programme today, a Celtic Way columnist, but you can also find him on Celtic by Numbers and the Huddle Breakdown. Wonderfully talented Alan Morrison. How are you, Alan? I'll give you a wee ripple.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and you as well, Tony. We were just having a wee joke before the show started there, because when Tony and I appear sometimes on the Celtic State of Mind podcast as well, and we're just saying there's no referee today, so buckle in. Could get bumpy.
We'll act like adults, Alan. We'll try. Or nearly grown men, something like that. Now, as I always do, the first stat that I say in the morning, Alan, is the one that you can see in your screen there, and it's the One Football app. Get downloading the One Football app, ladies and gentlemen. It's a cracking app, and it's your one-stop football shop for scores, news, lineups, transfer rumours, live streaming, match highlights, and much, much more. You can immerse yourself in the digital football world and have the best digital football experience out there. It's a cracking app, and I thoroughly recommend it. And also, running along the bottom, as we do every day, you can enjoy a free trial on us, free 30 days, www.celticway.co.uk/subscribe. You know what to do. You can see stuff from me, but more importantly, you can see stuff from Alan. There you go. Alan's columns there, always hard-hitting and always a great and interesting read. Now, Alan, speaking of things on the website, Sean, Alison and I have written a piece today that's on the website. You can have a look at it, guys. It's about Angie's contract. It always kind of seems to a topic that comes up. Now, he's currently on a 12-month rolling contract, Alan. Should they sign Ange Postecoglou on a longer-term deal? Does it bother you? Does it concern you? Is people getting all het up about nothing?
Well, 12-month means 12 months on either side in terms of notice. I'm guessing so. Yeah. It protects the club in the sense of there would only be 12 months to pay up in the event of a sacking. But on the other hand, if a club kind of effectively poached him, there would only be, I guess, 12 months of compensation. So there's pros and cons to it, to these things. The world of football and contracts, it's a bit of a minefield, isn't it? It's such a venal business, really. You'll hear me talk about the love the sport, hate the business, something I say quite often in terms of football. But I think what we're dealing with here is probably a slightly different animal in Postecoglou, in terms of he does seem quite old-fashioned in the sense of, I think if Celtic are happy and he's happy, these sort of things aren't going to be much of an issue, and he's not going to be a difficult person to deal with. So I think a long-term contract would protect the club, probably, because I think we've all seen enough to realise that this is a really top-class manager. I'm sure in time there will be overtures from other places now that he's proven himself. And I think will continue to prove himself, hopefully, in a European context. It'd be fascinating to see how we do in Europe. If we do quite well in Europe, I think that will only increase his stock. So a longer contract would probably be more in Celtic's interest in terms of, a compensation fee. I mean, we saw Celtic received an enormous amount of money for when Brendan Rodgers and team left, and I think even Rangers got a fair whack when Gerrard and team left as well. So these things can work out well, and that sort of money is quite transformative to even in the context of Celtic and the size of they are. So I think it would be more around protecting Celtic actually if we gave him a longer contract. But I'm not kind of it doesn't exercise me greatly. I think, as I say, the key is to keep Ange happy, and I think as long as we do that, then I think all will be good.
I think Celtic got £9 million, Alan. It was one of the highest ever financial compensation packages for a manager. And I like yourself, the retro Celtic say, Ange isn't bothered, then why should we? I think there's an element of that, isn't there? But there's also an element of protecting the club as well. And
I think so. Just before we came on air, I just double checked. We were talking about, I wonder where he's, how long he's been at clubs. And his first managerial gig was at South Melbourne, and he was there for 4 years. before he went to take over the Australian under-21 team.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look, and he was actually in charge of the under-21s for quite a long time, for about 6 years. But otherwise, you're really looking at 2 to 3 years is the norm for Ange. So he was at Marinos for just over 3 years. So I think there might be an element of I think he's a man who it won't be about putting another contract in front of him with more. There's another zero at the end of it. It will be if he feels he's got nothing more to give, or he feels the challenge isn't there anymore. I think he'll move on regardless, and it won't be to do with money. So I think that's going to be the key to it. Really, it's how long does he feel he can keep continuing to take Celtic forward? Will be the driver, I think.
You mentioned a great phrase to me off air. You said he's kind of old school, and he's one of these guys. My word is my bond type thing. He seems to be that way. That's the way he kind of operates, because he said himself that he's not bothered. These things will take care of himself, and he's not worried about a longer term deal. So that I guess that's the way he operates, isn't it?
It is, and as I say, I think that's fine, and especially where we are, sort of a year in. But as I say, the only thing I would say is just for the club's protection, that might be.
Yeah.
If it looks like Celtic, if it looks like he's built a team that's going to scale up to competing at a European level, I think the interest in him will start to rise through Europe, quite quickly, and it might be then in Celtic's interest to time down a little bit longer. That would be my only thought. Otherwise, as you say, it's not something I think is a huge issue. No,
not yet.
Not yet. No.
Now, speaking of things that maybe keep you awake at night, Alan, recruitment, new players, and there's lots of names that keep cropping up, but two in particular, Koei Takura and Taylor Harwood-Bellis.
That's 3 names.
Yes, indeed. Now, the Manchester City links there, you're a stats man. Am I 2-2-4 or 2-2-5 people?
I don't think so. I mean, Mark Lowell has left that building and he's joined Celtic, and I'm sure he comes with a range of contacts and knowledge about the City Group network. He'll know the people. Ange looks like he was kind of circuitously hired by Celtic through that network of people who know each other and so forth. So, listen, I think that's going to be a resource that hopefully Celtic continue to tap into. Whether it ever becomes a formalised relationship and a commercial relationship, I don't think so. It looks like the City Group, outside of Manchester City themselves, are looking at more sort of developmental size clubs, if I can put it that way, rather than a club of Celtic size. So I'm not sure it would ever be formalised, but I think on an informal basis, it looks like there's a lot of good relationships there, and it's a relationship game, isn't it? Why wouldn't you take advantage of that? So I think with these two players, it's an interesting one. There's another sort of external dynamic to throw into the mix with both of these players, which is, I think it's from July the 1st. The rules change. I don't know if it's just in England, around the number of players that you can loan out at any one time. We've all seen over the last 10 years or so, clubs like Chelsea especially, having 20, 30 players out on loan. And there's other clubs, Udinese would be a good example, that have stockpiled promising players from around the world. And then they sort of work on the basis that if 2 or 3 of them turn out to be great for the first team, fantastic, sell them on at a massive profit. Otherwise, if the rest of them, send them out on loan. If they do okay, we'll probably flip them, and make a few quid that way, sort of thing. It's not a great. It's like playing Championship Manager or Football Manager, really, to be honest. But I think this rule change on July the 1st is to stop teams kind of stockpiling and then mass loaning out of players. I think the exception to that is if they're homegrown or classified as homegrown. And again, homegrown is a little bit of a kind of flexible phrase in terms of, this doesn't necessarily mean that they're English or Scottish. It just means that they've been in your development system for a number of years. They may have come from Spain or whatever. So the reason that I mention that is because if you look at the two players that you mentioned there, Itakura is Japanese, obviously, 25 years old, so a relatively experienced individual. 100 I think he's got nearly 200 games, 150 professional matches, never played a single minute for Manchester City, not a single minute. And you've got to think that the age he's at and the rule change that I've just mentioned, if they've got others that perhaps are potential first team players or players they think they're going to flip for a bit of money, then they're probably wanting to sell players like Itakura, who are not going to be near the Manchester City first team, etc. So I think if the interest in Itakura is genuine, I suspect it's a sale arrangement.
Mm-hmm.
Harwood Bellis, I think, is a bit different because he's only 20 years old. He would definitely fit into their kind of homegrown, but he also looks like a player who they genuinely have some belief may impact the first team. He's already made 8 appearances in Manchester City's first team. He's captained England at virtually every age group level. This is definitely, it looks to me like a player that Manchester City rate very highly. And therefore, if Celtic were interested, it would purely be on a loan basis.
A loan basis,
and the complexity and difficulty of that is not only are we essentially developing another team's player, but it wouldn't be a stretch to imagine there would be some kind of minimum playing kind of arrangement built into the contract, which means you're almost kind of compelled to play him, which for Celtic, for a 20-year-old centre back, is a bit of a risk. So that one doesn't sound as likely to me, but the Itakura one, if the money was right, potentially would be a sale. A purchase.
Yeah, I think Taylor Harwood-Bellis is also interesting. Burnley for a loan deal as well, from what I've been reading. But Ko Itakura, I think you're right what you're thinking on that. But one's a centre back. Taylor Harwood-Bellis is a centre back, isn't he? And Ko Itakura can play centre back. He's a defensive midfielder.
Yes, different kind of player. I think the other thing that occurs to me when I look at them is Taylor Harwood-Bellis looks like a fairly traditional sort of centre back. Obviously young centre back, so you take the rough with the smooth in that sense. I mean, if you look at his stats I think he's played for Anderlecht and Stoke City, which again, if you look at those clubs, Anderlecht, Stoke City, they're good sized teams. Manchester City are trying to get him exposure to a good level, under a reasonable amount of pressure, and in a good or a tough league. I mean, Stoke are in the Championship; it's a tough physical league. Anderlecht are obviously in Belgium league, which is a good league, a lot of good players. So if you look at his stats from there, they're probably what you'd expect from a young defender. His sort of kind of dual success rate is probably not that high for a 6'2" defender. And is as you'd expect from a Manchester City player, his passing is good, is safe, and he's pretty decent at bringing the ball out from the back, which I think is something that Celtic are looking for in this transfer window. I think they're looking for a centre back option who's comfortable bringing the ball out from the back. So I again, just looking at the data and thinking about the context of his situation at City, I would be surprised if we went for Harwood-Bellis. Itakura is more likely, would be my thoughts, if it was within budget. He's a player, like you say, who can do kind of 2 jobs, centre-back or central midfielder. And he looks to be the sort of player that I think we're, in general, looking at, which is mobile, quite athletic type of player. He looks as a defender, he's the sort of defender I like. He doesn't make a lot of challenges. His tackle count, his duel count, is very low, and I can't pretend that I've watched a lot of him, but I'm hoping what that means is he's excellent positionally. He doesn't have to make a lot of challenges. He's usually in the right place at the right time. I mean, defending. That's why one of the reasons defending is so difficult to capture with data, because good defending is often the absence of things happening. And stats isn't particularly good about capturing nothing happening, especially when we are reliant on event data to really sort of capture defending and the essence of it. You're really needing to have positioning, tracking data, and then you're looking at spacing and whereabouts, how deep or high is the line, what's the communication like with your partner. You're looking at all those aspects that event data can't can't really capture. So sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. So Itakura, back to him. He looks to me like the sort of player that I think Celtic. He looks like a safe player. He's safe in possession. You're not going to get a lot of extravagant through balls like Hatate attempts or O'Reilly, a very creative type passer. I think he's more of a safe option. The fact he could play two positions suggests he may be being brought in as a kind of squad player, maybe not as a first pick, which is interesting because I would like to see Celtic getting another number one centre half in as well as Carter Vickers. So again, it may be people just putting the City thing together. Yeah. I think he's more likely than the young English player, but again, I don't think we would be spending 4.5-5 million, seems to be around the figure, for a sort of squad utility player. Yep. That sounds unlikely to me. So maybe there's not a lot in that either. But if we do get him, as I say, good all rounder, safe in possession, looks like a well organised, kind of composed defender.
Speaking of defenders, Alan, Josip Juranovic discussed. I mean, France, that's them. They can't defend their UEFA Nations League title. 1-0 defeat to Croatia last night. Josip Juranovic played, and I mean, is that him just taking off where he left from the season with Celtic, carrying his club form into the international arena?
Yeah, possibly. I think. I mean, France, frankly, have been poor since they won the World Cup. And I think they won the World Cup. They played great football, but I mean, I personally don't like Deschamps as a coach. I think he's too defensive. For the players that he's got, I think they can do a lot more in an attacking sense. So it'd be interesting to see whether if they continue to have really disappointing form, will they make a change before the World Cup? I mean, they drew in Austria, drew with Croatia, they lost to Denmark, who we know are a really good side. Croatia just seem to be a never-ending ability to put out competitive football teams. They've still got Modric, who I just think is a wonderful player. In many ways, I think Croatia beating Denmark 1-0 is just as impressive, if not more so, because I think Denmark are a cracking team.
Yeah.
But Juranovic, back to him then. So he played left back in that match against France. And I was just looking at before we came on air, I was just looking at the numbers from that game, and it looks to me as if he played a pretty disciplined role. It doesn't look like he got forward very much. I mean, France dominated possession of the ball. Most of the game was played in Croatia's half. France didn't create. They created a few big chances. It looks like it was a sort of classic counter-attacking job from Croatia, but it looks like Juranovic wasn't playing the sort of swashbuckling attacking role that he would play for Celtic. It looked like he was playing a more disciplined role, a classic sort of full-back role, really. His passing was safe. He didn't give the ball away much. He did well on his ground duels type of thing, but there was very little creativity there. So good, solid performance from him, definitely. But it's interesting as well that he's played every minute of the June internationals, which is a concern. They've had 4 games, Croatia, since the Celtic season ended, and he's played in every minute of them. So he's clearly cemented himself as a regular in what is an excellent Croatian side. So that's all good news for him. But I think the guy needs a rest, potentially.
Could also augur well, Alan, if you're talking about that disciplined role, if Celtic are going to need to be more disciplined in the Champions League against tougher opposition. So
absolutely.
For performing that role and that function.
Definitely. I don't think Ange will compromise on wanting to go at the opposition.
Yeah.
But I think it's always fine margins. There's a line to be tread around, a balance between all out attack and maybe holding back a little bit. But I think in general, for a player like Juranovic that plays for Celtic, to be going to France and winning international matches, keeping clean sheets and playing at that level, I think it's got to be a good thing.
Yeah, I'm looking at the comments coming in, Alan. It'd be remiss of me. Lots of people are worried about Jota, so I'll get your own take on Jota and why it's not been done. Give me patience and give me it now with the Celtic fans.
Yeah, I know.
Try, So your thoughts on that? Is it merely a time delay, or Are you getting worried about that? Do you think he's going to go?
No, there's no indication that that's the case. I mean, there's certainly nothing from the player to indicate that he doesn't see, his future being at Celtic, or that he's got other interests elsewhere. I suspect what I do know is that the whole Jota situation has caused a lot of issue at Benfica. There's a lot of unhappiness from supporters and people within the club that it looks like they've let him slip away, and with the nature of the contract that they agreed with Celtic, with this kind of, the right to buy essentially, but always comes down to the player at the end of the day. But the player seems to genuinely want to stay, and Benfica, I think there's some in the club that are absolutely furious about this. So it wouldn't surprise me if they're being as difficult as they can be with Celtic. There's no indication to me that this is an issue at the Celtic end or at the player end, and ultimately the player has the decision here. I'm only speculating. I don't know, but I would suspect because of that background and the fact that there might be a little bit of trying to kind of backtrack a little bit from the Benfica side, just because of the level of unhappiness there was around letting the players, seemingly go. But having said that, I think their coach came out quite clearly. Then you got a new manager. And I think he did say in public that he didn't think Jota fitted into his plans. So, but again, maybe the Benfica hierarchy are just trying to squeeze that last euro out of Celtic, possibly. I don't know, but I wouldn't be worried as such, because they ultimately, I'd look at the player. What does the player want to do? Is his heart? Where's his heart? And where's his head? And all the signs seem to be that he wants to come back.
I was looking at him wearing Celtic strips in New York, Alan, playing fantasy. Things like that. Maybe I was jumping the gun a bit, but certainly I'm not particularly perturbed. He wants to be one of the highest paid players at the club, I guess, and he will.
There's that as well.
So it's. But lots of people say he won't hold the club to ransom, and he won't hold the club to ransom. I get that, but if you want these kind of players at your club, then you're going to have to offer them some inducement, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And Jota's agent wouldn't be doing his job if he wasn't pushing as hard as he can. That's just that's the nature of it.
Now, we spoke about Juranovic, Alan. Alan did a wonderful piece on the Celtic way about the Bricky, Anthony Ralston, didn't he? And you said he's earned his hard hat, which I thought was a wonderful phrase. And all the stats were there, and he topped it off with a wonderful goal. In the 2-0 win over Armenia for Scotland, Larsson-esque. Lots of people were describing the header, but big up to Anthony Ralston for the numbers that he's produced this season, hasn't he?
No, absolutely. Obviously, stylistically, he's not the easiest on the eye as the sort of the Bricky tab has come about. The way he kind of waddles across the pitch, but my goodness, credit to the young lad. I mean, what a season he's had, and if you look at his numbers, I mean, in the article I brought in Juranovic and I brought in Tavernier, because obviously when I read the newspapers, I'm led to believe he's the greatest right back that's ever lived. So he's a good benchmark for a humble Bricky like Ralston. And what was actually fascinating was that on a lot of there's actually, if you look at the three of them, you can make a case. If you were to say which one's better, it's like, well, it's not as simple as that. I think each of them has their strengths and weaknesses, but the point being, there wasn't a lot of difference between any of them. And in fact, you could make a case for Ralston actually being the most impressive. I mean, if you take away penalties, actually, Ralston's got a slightly better expected assist rate and creates slightly more chances than Tavernier from open play, because obviously Ralston doesn't take corners and free kicks like Tavernier does either. So actually, Ralston's open play creativity numbers are better than Tavernier's, and you won't be reading that in the Daily Record, I don't think. So that was quite surprising, and I'm having a bit of fun with it. But what was also surprising was that on many of the defensive stats, he was actually outperforming Juranovic as well, and it made me think, because if I forget all the stats and all the data and I just park that to one side and I just watch the two of them, to me, it's quite obvious that Juranovic is a better footballer, and the reason, and I was thinking, well, there's so much data now, and I think you can quite accurately characterize and describe virtually every player you just using data, even if you'd never seen them, you could quite accurately do it, and you wouldn't be far off. I was thinking, what is it about those two players that says that if I look at the data, I could make a case for Ralston being the best right back in the league, right? But when you watch him, you sort of thinking, and I think what it is, it came down to a couple of things really. One is I think Ralston's game does degrade the more pressure he's put under. His first touch is not quite as secure. He doesn't physically move. He's not as physically agile and light on his feet, and he doesn't do things as quickly. With Juranovic, you get that ground speed, but you also get the surety of touch, which opens up the game for the next thing that you're doing. And you get that he just does things slightly more quickly. And when you're playing in Europe against better opponents, I mean, a good example of this was, I don't know, maybe I don't know how many of the viewers would watch a Germany-England international, but I did anyway. And it was fascinating because both teams pressed each other relentlessly for the full 90 minutes. Both teams were on each other as soon as they got the ball. And both teams, especially Germany, England tend to go long quite a lot, but Germany were trying to play it from the back like Celtic do, irrespective of the pressure they were being put under. And the reason I mention that is that to me is an example of the way that those players were receiving the ball, because you weren't going to receive the ball in 10 yards of space, get your head up, have a think, ping the ball. You were going to get the ball, you're going to be under pressure from a strong athletic opponent, and you're going to have to then maneuver yourself to work an angle to then pass to somebody else who's going to be under pressure, right? That takes that skill to be able to take a ball under pressure while you're being physically battered, so your touch is good, your core strength is good, so you're physically you've got physical abilities as well as technical abilities, and then to be able to maneuver and then to see the next action, you've got to do that quite quickly. That speed of thought, speed of movement, strength, those attributes, those are the things that you need when when you talk about scaling up to play in like European competition. And that's where your Juranovic, you would say, is far better in that regard than Ralston. So I think that's what it comes in, and it's very difficult to measure that precisely in the data. So I think that's what it comes down to. That's why you would say, yes, I'll play Juranovic against Bayern Munich rather than Ralston. But Ralston's numbers that he racks up through the season. Now, what I need to do really is do a bit of analysis that looks at the numbers in the big European games and then probably the derby matches as well, and see what's the difference between domestic bread and butter versus those kind of high profile difficult opponents, and then see what the differences are between the data at that point, and that might help to then explain in data terms the difference between the players. But it's a fascinating one, and whatever.
Without doubt.
Whatever we say, it will never not take away from what a fantastic season that Ralston has had. Yeah.
Indeed. Now, a man that can step up to the plate in Europe in any kind of arena, Callum McGregor. Alan, some numbers for you. He's 29 today. There you go. Happy birthday to Callum McGregor. Yeah. He just seems to have been around forever, doesn't he? And he's been top for so long.
Yeah, and I think not just him. I mean, I don't know if you watch the abject Scotland performance in Ireland, but it was a performance completely lacking in energy, intensity, everything really. I mean, the Irish were hounding Scotland around the pitch, and we had no answer to it. It was pretty depressing actually. But McGregor, as much as anyone, looked like he needed a check out and to be on the beach really.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you mention his age, because again, to play the kind of football that Postecoglou wants to play, very high intensity. I mean, we know that McGregor, he's not the fastest in the world, but he's got good ground speed. Technique-wise, he's good, and he puts a lot of energy into the game. But he is 29, and he's had a lot of football on his legs. And I do think, I'm not saying that he's finished, I'm not saying that he's past it, but we do need to start thinking about not relying on him game after game after game, and also thinking about, okay, well, who's potential succession, who's after him type of thing. So it's quite interesting that we do seem to be looking at defensive midfielders, and we do seem to be looking at players like Itakura who could play a similar kind of role to McGregor. And I think that's sensible. I really do. I don't think that's McGregor's not going to get dropped. I think sometimes he'll push on one and play in one of the 8 positions, and sometimes he might get rotated out. And I think that's wise. Yeah.
I think rotation for a player like Cal Mack moving forward would be a good thing, Alan. You say not necessarily drop, it's just to give his legs a rest, because he's played an inordinate amount of football, over 60 games for like the past 5 seasons consecutively.
Yeah, so exactly. Yeah,
I think you said that there, one of the pods we were on. It was a ridiculous amount of football, really, isn't it?
He's been averaging. I mean, I think it was it last. No, it wasn't last year. I know we've had all the COVID disruption, but before COVID, I think for 2 years he'd played more football than any other footballer on the planet.
Yeah,
and it wasn't even close. I mean, and that's even. I think Brazil play like 2 league seasons in one, don't they? They have two full sort of league calendars and all, and then they have cups and regional competition, all that sort of thing. He's playing more than any of those players as well. So that's just for and in an intense position like he plays in central midfield. At some point, that's got to catch up with you. I mean, he had his first, I think, the first muscle injury of his Celtic career last season. He had that hamstring tweak. He only kept him out for about 5 or 6 weeks, not long. I don't know if it was even that long, actually. 5 or 6 games, maybe. But, little warning signs. And, it's only going to get more intense in terms of handball and the intensity that Celtic will play at, the demands of a Champions League campaign, the intensity of that, the pace will be that much quicker. So I think we do need to start kind of looking after him a little bit.
Excellent. Now, I'll end on a high note, Alan. Celtic manager Ange Postecoglou would have been dancing a jig of delight. I don't know if you saw the Australia goal.
Oh, yeah.
They won through to the World Cup on penalties against Peru. So we say congratulations to Ange and congratulations to Australia. I'm sure he'll be delighted with that. It was some finish, wasn't it? Some end, because the goalkeeper was substituted on for that very reason for Matt Ryan. With like 3 minutes to go, and he, I don't know if you saw his antics on the goal line. I don't know what he was doing. But he was doing some kind of jig on the goal line, right. And they get warned twice by the referee. But he came up trumps and he saved the penalty to Redmond to take them through. So, wonderful news for Australia.
Yeah, and if that means we get to see Tom Rogic in a World Cup, that'll be good. I mean, I feel a bit sorry for Peru. They're probably quite an exciting. I think they're quite an exciting team. I think Australia are probably a little bit of a solid unit. I think Rogic is probably their spark. But yeah, great for them. I didn't see it, unfortunately. I was actually following it on one of the football apps because I was out last night. I was just following the penalties sort of thing as we were going in. I think it was 0-0, wasn't it? So brilliant. I mean, heartbreaking for Peru, obviously, to go out on penalties like that. But great. It will be great to see, and not just that, but we'll probably see Martin Boyle, and Harry Souttar as well plays for Australia, as well. So it'll be good to see some well-kent faces there.
Well, Alan, in terms of stats, I think that was a solid 8, possibly 9 out of 10 debut for you on the Celtic Way Daily Briefing. Thanks very much. I could talk to you all day. I wish we had all day, but really, really enjoyed that. I normally take comments, but I was just so engrossed in the chat that I forgot to take comments. So don't take it personally, guys. But I was reading them as they were coming in and trying to get Alan's thoughts on a few of your comments. But we'll do it again, Alan. But if you want to catch Alan, you can hear him on the Celtic by Numbers podcast and the Huddle Breakdown. He also appears on a Celtic State of Mind with myself. And as you can see along the bottom, hit that subscribe button, guys. A free trial, www.celticway.co.uk/subscribe. And while you're at it, why don't you download the One Football app? The link's in the description. Thank you. Thanks for that contribution, Alan. First class. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Tony. Been a pleasure.